Hey everybody, I'm JC from One Shot Adventures, and today I'm going to review the Dungeon Crawl Classics adventure, Shadow of the Beakmen, and I'm going to give you game masters a few tips on how to run it like a pro. Dungeon Crawl Classics adventures are really fun for me to dive into. I love that they're always dangerous. I'm talking about the kind of danger that can easily kill off a character or two if they're careless, but I know that's not for everybody. I also really like that one of the tenets of Dungeon Crawl Classics is that they just stay away from generic fantasy. You won't find orcs and goblins in Dungeon Crawl Classics adventures. Instead, you'll find weird abominations and otherworldly monsters, and today, hordes of evil Beakmen. But before I dive into the review of Shadow of the Beakmen, I want to warn you that there's spoilers ahead. So if you're thinking about playing in this adventure, why don't you go roll up a level 1 Gong Farmer instead. Shadow of the Beakmen is designed for first level characters. It's pretty short actually. It's about 16 pages long, and I bet most game masters can get their players through this in a single session, about 3 or 4 hours. Now usually Dungeon Crawl Classics heroes have been through a 0 level funnel before they get to this kind of challenge. So just because the adventure is designed for first level characters, you're still going to want to make sure those characters are fairly well equipped with decent weapons and equipment before going in, because this adventure gets tough fast. The setup is this. The PCs are wandering through the woods looking for a warm bed at a nearby lakeside village. Suddenly, they see the flicker of fire in the distance. They hear shouting and screams. The village is under attack. The PCs don't get much time to wonder who's attacking this town, because a creature in scaly black armor rides out of the woods atop a giant crocodile, chasing a wounded man-at-arms. He's carrying this bizarre lance tipped with a glowing green spear. With a battle cry, the crocodile knight turns away from his victim and attacks the PCs. Okay, so that's a pretty classic kickoff to a fantasy adventure. While the village is under attack has been used many times before, it really does make it easier to insert this adventure after a previous one. But if you're kicking off a campaign with this adventure, you're going to want to do some extra work on the backstory. The adventure doesn't really describe this town very much or suggest why the PCs might be visiting it. When I ran this adventure, I changed the village into a brand new fort, something that was being built to protect civilization from the wild frontier of the land. The PCs were heading there to sign up as wardens because the pay was good and there was lots of opportunity for promotion. The fort hadn't fully been finished yet, so it was understaffed and it was really vulnerable to attack. And because it was located so far out on the frontier, 100 miles from civilization or so, the PCs knew that they were alone and had no chance of finding help nearby. So after the PCs defeat this crocodile knight, they discover that the settlement is under attack by more of these creatures, but also the Beakmen, these strange, unnatural humanoids. The Beakmen kind of remind me of the Skeksis from the Dark Crystal, which I really liked because their motivations are just so hard to immediately fathom. When the PCs reach the settlement, they see the battle's gone poorly, and the villagers, or in my case the few soldiers left behind, are being rounded up. To play into the weirdness of the Beakmen, I decided that some of the prisoners were being executed immediately, while others were being smelled and sniffed, and then being kept for reasons that had yet to be explained. Worse, the PCs soon see a shadowy figure summoning a massive glowing obelisk from the lake, and more Beakmen pour out of it, hungry to take more prisoners. This figure is the Master, the leader of the Beakmen. His plan is to bring the captives back into his obelisk and in some disgusting process transform them into more Beakmen servants. So naturally the heroes need to get into the obelisk and defeat the Master before it's too late. This middle section of the adventure gets a little narratively tricky. The players are not going to see a lot of great options, and the GM's going to have to help them out. The Beakmen are pouring out of the obelisk, so the player's first instinct won't be to go in there. They'll probably try to save the village first, but the adventure makes it clear that the village is overrun and that it's hopeless. So that's not going to seem like a good idea either. So the players' choices seem to be to either charge into the obelisk, which is the headquarters where all the troops are pouring out of, which will seem like suicide, or stay in the village that's being overrun by beakmen and crocodile knights, which definitely is suicide, or to just run away into the hills where the adventure has them chased down by more crocodile knights. So you can see from a player's perspective, this can really look like a no-win situation at this point.
We shall retake the village tonight.
Impossible.
No.
That place is overrun by beakmen.
Ah, then we shall take on the obelisk by force.
That's where the beakmen are coming from.
Well, the hills look nice.
But there's an easy fix to this. You just need an NPC. Maybe that wounded man-at-arms from the beginning of the adventure, the one the crocodile knight was chasing. If the man-at-arms tells the PC, maybe as he's dying, that the women and children at the fort escaped ahead of the beakmen attack. They were warned by some crazy hermit the day before who showed up and said this night was going to bring chaos and death, and the women and children fled out of the fort just before nightfall. But they weren't able to get very far before the beakmen arrived, and now the beakmen are heading deep into the hills and the forests to find and round up the fleeing villagers. So the PC's only hope is to destroy that obelisk before the beakmen return. While this is a little tweak, it really helped motivate my players to rush into the obelisk and try to kill the master. The inside of the obelisk is actually the majority of the adventure. It's a small 8-room dungeon, and it's actually pretty straightforward. There's no intricate traps or puzzles in here. The obstacles are mostly enemies, but the layout of the obelisk is actually pretty good, and it sets the players up for lots of ambushes and tactics. The players really have to use their wits in here. There's a lot of beakmen in the obelisk. One of the rooms has 8 of them. Another room has 14 beakmen all camped out, ready to kill the players. If your players just blunder into these rooms without thinking or a plan, I guarantee you they're going to get overwhelmed by the beakmen. While the beakmen aren't individually tough, I think they have about 4 hit points and they do about 4 points of damage on an attack. There's enough of them to easily overrun careless players. I think this is a feature of Dungeon Crawl Classics, but if you're playing with newer players, please warn them that not every fight is going to be winnable here. There's 2 sections of this obelisk that I really liked. One, there's this submerged tunnel that connects 2 rooms together, where one of these massive crocodiles lives. This played out like an action movie with my players swimming one at a time through the tunnel, hoping to make it. It was really tense and scary for them since one of those crocs can easily do enough damage to kill someone in 1 or 2 hits. The second part that I really liked is the PCs can find a demon kind of hidden away in a corner of the obelisk. She's trapped there. Her name's the Weaver. Her presence is not really explained, so I implied that this demon has been trapped here by the master, who was slowly using her blood to create more beakmen. But my players were certainly surprised to find her here, and a little freaked out to see that there's a spidery demon begging for them to free her. She'll even offer to make them some demonic items out of her webs if they free her. While this wasn't really attached to the rest of the adventure, it really made for a fun role-playing moment in the middle of a dungeon that was otherwise short on NPCs. Finally, the PCs make their way to the top of the obelisk where the master is waiting. This is a really clever boss battle. The master has a huge magical lantern, which he cranks, and as he cranks it, it casts these shadows on the wall. The shadows, of course, come to life and defend him, and the more he cranks away at the lantern, the stronger they get. So the PCs have to chop their way through the shadows to get to the master, even as he's cranking away, making more of them and making them more powerful. It really requires great coordination on behalf of the players to beat him, and I can hear this like crazy soundtrack in my head as this encounter played out at the table. Although this boss battle is pretty playable right out of the box, I have a couple suggestions on how to make it even better. One, I found that it was weird that the lantern actually had more hit points than the master. So really the PC's best strategy is to ignore the lantern and just pile onto the master. So I actually put the master and the lantern on a raised platform in the middle of the room to make it harder for the players to get to him. This also gave the person in the party with a ranged weapon something to do where he could shoot out the lenses of the lantern as his friends climbed up the platform to take out the shadows and the master. I also lowered the hit points of those lenses from 5 to 1 to make them a little more fragile and take into account that this new layout I created was a little bit harder for the players. Next, the adventure describes how the shadows form into the shapes of creatures like griffins and ogres and spiders. I found this really weird because Dungeon Crawl Classics prides itself on no standard D&D like monsters and only crazy weird unique monsters. What's generic fantasy griffins doing in my Dungeon Crawl Classics adventure? This is a super minor nitpicky point, but I changed these shadows to be more like Lovecraftian horrors, writhing tentacles and eyeless spawn and stuff like that, just to make it all a little creepier and fit in with the rest of the adventure just a little better. This end battle can be tough, especially if the PCs are still hurt from their previous encounters with the Beakmen. I wouldn't be surprised if the Master and his lantern claimed his fair share of adventuring parties at this point, but hey, it's Dungeon Crawl Classics, no complaining unless you're a 0 level. I bought the virtual tabletop assets for Shadow of the Beakmen, which are really helpful because this adventure's map, like a lot of the ones in Dungeon Crawl Classics, is beautiful, but it's isometric, which makes it really hard to use in an online game. The VTT assets include new maps for the obelisk and some tokens. They're okay. I didn't love them, even at the price point of $5, but it did make the adventure a little easier to prepare. I did make 2 changes to the maps. First, I thought the map was this really weird bright pastel color, and so I actually went into Photoshop and I desaturated it and toned it down. You can kind of see here what I did just to make the maps feel a little grittier and more in line with how I think Dungeon Crawl Classics should run. Also, there was this little oversight where one of the rooms describes 3 different colored pools, and the map for some reason didn't show that they were different colors, so I also had to go into Photoshop and fix that up. I also found it annoying that the maps had the grid burned into them, which for VTT games is usually not ideal. You want to use your VTT program's grid instead. The tokens are fine. The Master looks a little bit like Naked Yoda, which I found to be a bit distracting. And the astral shadows don't match the description in the adventure at all, but it's actually better than the description in the adventure because they was those Lovecraftian horrors, so I'll take it. But overall, the VTT assets are not great. VTT assets aside, I totally recommend Shadow of the Beakmen. The 3 things I like the best is, well, first it has that otherworldly creepy feel. A lot of the Dungeon Crawl Classics adventures have this quality, but Shadow of the Beakmen really leans into that. The world's dangerous and bizarre and the PCs are alone against the chaos. I really like the feel of this adventure. Second, it's really easy to prepare. You can read it in like 20 minutes and just be ready to run it. It's one of those adventures that's great if you're too tired to prepare something and you got friends coming over for Dungeon Crawl Classics in an hour. You can actually pull it off and run it and have a great session. Finally, I like that it really requires your players to be smart in order to survive. And that memorable boss battle is really fun. It has those tough tactical choices the players are going to have to make. My only real critique of the adventure is that the middle of the adventure needs a little bit more NPC guidance to give the players hints as to what they should go do, and that it really doesn't leave a lot of plot hooks for future adventures if you're looking for that. But those are minor things, and I really like this adventure, and I give it 6 out of 7 beaky, spear, glowing crocodile. It's pretty good, and I think you should check it out if you like old school feeling adventures. I hope this review was helpful to anybody looking to run Shadow of the Beakmen. If you like this video, hit the like and subscribe button before the Master shows up with his lantern. And if you end up using some of my tips and tricks when you run this adventure, let me know in the comments below how it went for you. Until next time, I'm JC. I'll see you soon.